everyone, it's Danny from Orchid Nature. So a while back, a viewer of mine asked me how I photograph my orchids. I was doing that video with the photograph that was featured on the American Orchid Society, and it looked pretty good for a beginner in photography like I am. So yeah, I will make a video today for you on how I photograph my orchids. You can view my photographs on Flickr and you have a link in the description. Anyway, first off, I really am not an expert on photography. I just got my first entry-level DSLR in December. It was a gift, and yeah, I'm trying to learn it, but I'll give you a few tips for just your average good quality photographs if you want to photograph your orchids in a better way than using, you know, the one-shot cameras and all of that. Now, first off, the setting. I definitely don't have a studio or anything like that, and I take most of my photos in my balcony with what I have. Now, because my balcony is slightly narrow, I don't necessarily use as a background the other orchids. I cannot. It would be great, but I simply can't. So what I do is I try to provide a dark background, and what this is, it's just a very dark blanket which I try to hang up in a pin board. It's a cork board or something, you know, for post-its, and that's my background. With the big orchids, I don't know, I have troubles, but with the small ones like this one, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so this is the setup, and the light is natural light, and of course it's not direct sunlight because it will create a lot of shadows and everything, so it's bright diffuse light, or bright shade if you want. So I find that's the best light you can give them. Of course, artificial light can work as well if you set your camera to artificial light and all of that. My artificial light in my house doesn't look so good on camera, so that's why I use natural filtered light, and it's pretty okay. Even if it's cloudy, it's way better than my artificial light. Okay, so as a camera, I use this Canon camera. It's just an entry-level DSLR, as I told you. I think it's the Canon 1100D. Anyway, I hope I'm not mistaken. You have the proper name in the description. I'll just check it out on the box. It doesn't say anywhere. Okay, so this camera actually came with a kit lens, which is pretty good. I just switched it to a Sigma lens. It just makes zooming better on this one, so I can get a sort of a macro-ish photo. Anyway, I'm not gonna get into details. The kit lens for this one will work as well for your basic orchid photography. Okay, so I will really not get into details on what all of these do. There are a lot of tutorials on YouTube from much more knowledgeable people who can explain better. I'll just tell you about the settings I use, a little bit on why I use them, and so on. So this is the DSLR I'm using and the lens that I'm using. Okay, as a setting, I never ever go for automatic. I think that's the worst setting for kind of artistic photographs. If you're with your friends on a day out or at a party, yeah, I use the automatic because things will move so fast that you won't have time to actually set your camera. But if you're doing still images with still things like orchids, don't ever use the automatic setting. Go towards a manual or a semi-manual thing. I personally use AV. Now, what AV does, it controls the shutter speed by itself, but I get to control the depth of field. Again, I will not go into these details, but I'll show you what they do. Hopefully, I will manage. Oh, okay, this is the name. There you go, this is the name of my camera, I just found it. Alrighty, so this is how the AV setting looks like on your screen now. Now, usually this camera sits on a tripod because the light is not so intense. If I keep it in my hands, the orchid, the picture will probably get very shaky because I don't like to use the flash it comes with, and I don't have an external flash to experiment with. So usually this sits on a tripod, but for now my camera is on a tripod. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about the settings that I use. Now, this thing here tells you how the depth of field is, how wide it is. Now, think of this as a plane in front of you. This setting will control which portion of that whole plane is in focus. And the smaller this number is, the shorter the depth of field will be. So if I try to take a photo of my orchid with a very low, let me show you, very low number here, I can go up to 3.5, as you can see. If I try to take a photograph for this orchid with that number that low, I will most probably get in focus these flowers here, or maybe just this flower, but the rest of the orchid and the flowers which are further away or in the back of my focus field will get blurry. That's not good. Usually this setting is used for a single thing that you want to photograph and you want everything behind it to be blurry. It can give a nice effect, but when you're dealing with orchids, it's not a good idea to use a very, very low f-stop or f number. So usually, or depending on the orchid, I will usually use a 6 point something, 6.3, depends. You have to play around a bit with this number to see what's in focus. You take the photograph, look at it, and see what's in focus, if you want more things in focus or not. Now the bad thing about Fs is that they make the shutter speed bigger, so that means the higher the number is, the more things will get into your focus, but you do need a tripod because it will get very blurry if your camera is shaky. So that's why I always use a tripod. Now another bad thing about having too much of a big number here is that the background will get into focus as well, and sometimes you don't want that. I definitely don't want all the lines in my blanket to show, and usually this number is enough to give it a sort of a blurry effect. But if you go with too high of a number, you'll get all your orchid in focus plus the background, and maybe you don't want to do that, so you kind of have to find the balance. Depends. But for me, about 6.3 it's a good enough f-stop for me. Now the ISO, well, the ISO is a thing that makes your shutter speed faster, so your images are not shaky and blurry and stuff like that. But the higher the ISO, the more noise the picture will have. I don't know how to explain this, but it will not get clear and smooth. So I usually never go above, well, 400 ISO is the limit. I usually try to take photos at 100 ISO or 200 ISO. Anyway, if you're using a tripod, this will probably not matter so much. Try to go with as low as you can, maybe 100 ISO, depending on your camera once again. And yeah, this will make the picture smoother, and it will not have those grainy things and all of that. I'm so bad at explaining. Anyway, don't go higher than 100. What is the matter with you? There we go. Anyway, there are a lot of other functions around here. I'm set to natural sunlight or natural light. You can change that as well. And what I actually like to do is try to set it to take the picture after 2 seconds, because when I press this button to take the photo, the camera is a bit shaky even on the tripod. So I just set it on 2 seconds. I press the button and in 2 seconds it takes the photograph without shaking it. Alrighty, these are the settings that I use. Now, I don't necessarily use this thing because I use a tripod. This you use only when you're, taking photographs like this in nature and all of that, but I don't usually do that. I need more experience. But if you're with a tripod, you can definitely go to the screen mode, and this will actually show you your photograph and you can view it properly. Now, if you have sun behind you, you won't be able to see the screen, so that's why it's best to use filtered light, not direct sunlight. You won't be able to see anything. Anyway, I forgot to tell you something very important. The lens, again, I never keep it on automatic because the camera is smart, but it's not that smart. It doesn't necessarily know where you want to focus. So sometimes if the picture is very crowded, she will decide to focus on a totally different thing, and that's not good. Also, it might not focus well. So I always use the manual setting for the lens, and I always focus it manually. But it's easy, actually. So here's a trick. Let's say I'm too close to this orchid at this point because this is not a macro lens and it will not get sharp no matter what I do. I need to be further away from it. But what I like to do, keep in mind this is on a tripod, I like to zoom in on my orchid and then try to focus it manually using this wheel here. And I try to focus it manually until I get a clear picture. This is so hard to do without a tripod. Anyway, I will not be able, but at some point it will get focused. Oh, I think this is starting to get a little bit focused here. but use this so you can properly see the focus. Anyway, when I have my focus properly, I just take the picture. This will be such a nasty picture because it's not on a tripod. But anyway, you can then view it and see if anything is wrong and all of that. And that's about it on my camera. I told you I will not go into details because I'm not a professional and I don't know how to explain stuff that well. But bottom line is, try to go with a setting that is not automatic, or it just has an automatic thing, like the shutter speed. Adjusting the shutter speed is another issue, and it takes into consideration other stuff. I will not go into it, but do search for tutorials if you're interested on what all of these do, what the shutter speed is, and the f-stops and all of that. And you'll know, it's easy actually. But for now, yeah, that's how I take pictures of my orchids. Now, post-production. So once I have my pictures, because I don't have a studio and a proper setting, some pictures might need a little bit of adjusting, like exposure. Maybe I want to get this background to be even darker, and so on. Maybe I have a few issues in my photograph. Now I usually use an application. I have Windows 8. My laptop came with Windows 8 and I got the Photoshop Express. It's a light version of Photoshop. You cannot really do everything you can do in Photoshop with it, but it's nice if you just want to adjust certain things in your picture, like exposure and a bit of colors and white balances and stuff like that. And you can also apply some cool filters to it. So I usually don't edit my pictures too much. I'm not too good at it, but sometimes I do play around with exposure a bit and a bit of the colors. Maybe I want to do the background a bit darker so you don't see all the lines in my blanket here. Also, another good tip for this, you can put a black t-shirt, a big black t-shirt behind it somehow, and yeah, that's a good background for small plants. But yeah, regarding editing, that's about it on what I do. If by chance my exposure was a bit off, then I will definitely try to correct it in a way that it's good. And regarding the colors, if they're a bit wiped because of the light or anything, I might intensify them a bit. Don't intensify them too much because they will look really awful. So that's about it. This is how I take photographs of my orchids. I think there's some other things I would have liked to talk to you about regarding the camera, but it's already a very long video and I'm not the best person to tell you about how cameras work and all of that. So if you go and watch some tutorials and then you go back to what I said about using the settings and controlling your camera, your lens manually as much as you can, then most probably you'll get a better picture than I, because I'm just I don't have time to properly study this subject. I just try to take the best pictures of my orchids, and that's it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video regarding the one-shot cameras, the small ones. I hate them. They never take good pictures for me, but I'll give you a small little tip. If you want to have a black background behind your orchid, use the flash, put the orchid in front of you as close to the camera as you possibly can, put the flash on, everything will be white, but the background will be a lot darker. So if you have like a purple background, you will get a dark purple background. If you have a sort of a black background, it will definitely be black. So that's how you get the black background with a one-shot or power shot or whatever you want to call them, those little pocket cameras. But other than that, you'll never get the clarity of a DSLR. It doesn't matter what kind of DSLR you have. With a decent lens, yeah, it's so much better than a one-shot camera. It's not so good when you're going out photographing nature and you have no idea what to do. But other than that, it's super good. So okay, hope you enjoyed this, and if you have other requests for me for videos, leave them in a comment. If you have questions regarding orchids, place them in a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe and visit orchidnature.com for our forums and our community. I'll see you next time. Bye!